right, welcome to the new JFK show number 127. All right, we've got Rouse and Kay, Dr. Jim Fetzer, Larry Rivera, Don Fox, and myself, and we're going to bring new information to you. We've got two presentations. Larry is going to start it off, so let's go, fellas.
Hey, hi everybody. Don suggested that we talk a little bit about Fidel Castro, and we're just going to do a couple of minutes here, maybe 15 minutes, on Fidel Castro, because he had a very interesting upbringing, in Cuba and his father and everything. And, despite what he became later on, a dictator, the environment in which he was brought up had a lot to do with what he became later on, okay? And this first slide is his father. His father was a sugarcane overlord in the eastern part of Cuba. Now, before his father became extremely rich, he was brought up in Cuba at a time when he was really a descendant of the Spaniards. He was really a Spaniard living in Cuba. And it's very interesting because there is a situation where he went back because he was in love with this girl back in Spain. And his father, Angel, went back to Spain chasing his girlfriend, trying to get back together with his girlfriend. When he got to Spain, he discovered that she had already got with another guy. Okay, so he was completely heartbroken and went back to Cuba. Now, I was telling somebody that we were having this conversation the other day that had she not gone off with another guy and stayed with Angel, history would have completely, because Angel would have never gone back to Cuba and done what he did, and then had Fidel and his brothers, and everything. So I thought that was a very, very interesting situation that we had to bring up here. Fidel actually was a bastard child. Okay,
is the father shown there in the trolley?
Yeah, right there. Yeah. Yeah. No, maybe. I'm not sure. No, I don't think so.
I think it's just a trolley with his name on it.
Yeah, because he became so.
Okay, I got a trolley with his name on it.
Yeah, he became. It's just representative of his status, in Oriente, which is the eastern part of Cuba, around the town of city of Santiago. But the next slide shows his father Angel with Fidel Castro's mother, who was his mistress, okay? And at the time, obviously, divorce was frowned upon, okay? And Angel Castro had 5 children with Maria, who was, the woman that he was married to originally. However, in the 1920s, the couple separated, and he started to have an affair with the cook, this woman by the name of Lina. And he had 3 boys and 1 girl, and the 2 of the boys were obviously Fidel and Raul. Now, they were not allowed to live in the main house. Can we go on to the next slide, Gary? Yeah, this is a photo of Lina, okay, and go on to the next one. I believe we got, okay, this is Fidel and his brother Raul. Fidel is at the top. His sister, okay, we're to the left, obviously. This is a very rare photograph of Fidel Castro. I don't know if any of you guys have ever seen this one.
No.
Which one is Raul?
Raul is the one on the bottom there, because he was the younger one. He was the younger one.
Who would be Che Guevara?
No. Raul Castro. Raul Castro.
Right. Oh, right. Who's the present president, isn't he?
Yeah, the president. Yeah, right now.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Fidel is the one on the top.
So Che was not actually a brother of...
No. Che was Argentinian. He was a doctor who migrated from Argentina, and he met Fidel in Mexico, and that's where they became friends and
Very good.
got involved in the revolution that way.
Very
Go
good.
ahead. Next slide. Yeah, this is a house that the family lived in, okay? But Fidel didn't live in this house. He lived in the house in accommodations that they had adjacent to the house where the workers lived. Now, Fidel grew up among the sugarcane cutters, okay? And he saw firsthand how his father mistreated his workers, and he paid them very badly, okay? And he basically was very despotic.
This is the kind of person Fidel rebelled against.
Exactly. Thank you, because that his very first rebellion was against his father.
Fascinating.
Okay? And so this is the psychology that's going on, in Fidel's mind, as he is growing up, and his father never recognized him until he was a teenager. Okay. And, like I said, he grew up among the children of his father employees. Okay. And for years, Fidel saw his father only as the owner of the land that he lived on for many, many years. Okay, he was not like I say, wasn't recognized by his father, and he mistreated and paid them badly. And like you just mentioned, the first rebellion that he had was against his father because of the exploitation of the people who worked for him. Okay, so this is the background. Okay, that Fidel grew up in, and then later on his father sent him to a Jesuit school. Okay, he was educated by the Jesuits, and eventually became a lawyer. Go ahead, Gary, to the next slide. And and these are very rare photographs of Fidel, and there's another boy in there, but I'm not sure who he is. Okay, but go on to the next one.
Wait, no. Was that Fidel in the middle, and then?
No, Raul is the one at the bottom. Fidel's the one on the right.
Yeah, on the right. Okay, thank you.
Much younger.
Yeah, he was younger. Yeah, go ahead. Next slide. That's a very, very rare photograph of Fidel. I think he's on some kind of tractor or something like that there. Go ahead to the next slide. And this is Fidel in school, okay? The one on the right with the pencil in his mouth, okay? He was bigger than the rest of the kids, okay? He was an athlete. He became a very good athlete, basketball player, baseball, okay? And in later years, he even played, I believe, semi-professional baseball. Okay, so go ahead to the next slide. Yeah, here's a photograph of Fidel playing basketball. Okay, like I said, he was taller than most of the other kids. So his athletic ability, sort of carried him when he was.
So he was charismatic from the beginning.
Yeah, but he was sort of like. Kids kind of made fun of him, because he was oafish, and that kind of thing, So, a lot of these characteristics that later on formed, what he became later on. Okay, go ahead to the next slide. Because I want to do this. This is a school that he was sent to in Santiago de Cuba, the school that I was talking about, the Jesuit school.
Almost looks like a prison.
Well, his father, after he recognized him and gave him his last name, he wanted him to get an education. Okay, and Fidel became a lawyer. Okay, and he learned English, and everything, but he always had that stigma of where he came from. Okay, and that is something that is really, really important in his formation and later on. Go ahead, next slide there.
Yeah, Castro had to have something going on to have Marita Loren later on, huh? She was pretty hot.
Well, and there's a photograph of Fidel when he was in the university. Okay, and go on. I believe we got the last slide. Okay, and the reason I wanted to point this slide out is because this is nothing but propaganda. The Spanish translation here. This is a photograph of a cowardly assassination of a poor villager, Cuban villager, or a mountain villager or something like that, okay? And he says, at the bottom says, when a miserable communist talks to you about human rights, show him this photograph. Okay, now if you look closely, the man that's going to be executed is wearing guerrilla fatigues and attire. Okay, it's not a villager. It's not a poor villager. And the reason this guy is being executed is because he had been raping women, young women, and girls, in the mountains and the mountain villages, and that's the reason that he was executed. So, in essence, here, what Fidel is doing is he's imparting justice, but very extreme justice, but for a crime that he wouldn't tolerate. Okay, so this is just an example of how
he's being tied to a tree before he's shot.
That's right, and Fidel is tying his hands, and Raul is covering his eyes, and that's Che, who you can't see his face in front of him, who's ready to shoot him. But this is nothing but propaganda. You know, like I said, you know, this is one of his Castro's own guerrillas. Okay, who. And in that area at that time, well, he's taking justice in his own hands and taking care of business there. You know, he wasn't going to tolerate that kind of behavior from the men under him. So basically, then later on, Fidel became very famous for the 26th of July, 1953 raid on the Moncada garrison in eastern Cuba, and when he was captured in that raid. It was about 135 people soldiers that he had recruited, and he became separated. So their armaments went one way, you know, the convoy got separated, the cars got separated, you know, the vehicles. So it was a disaster. Most of the guys, most of the soldiers or guerrillas, you know, were killed. Fidel, surprisingly enough, survived, and he was put in jail. Apparently, they didn't really know who he was, and he spent about a year and a half in prison, where he wrote a very important treatise called "History Will Absolve Me," which is still read a lot throughout the world. Okay. In court, he represented himself, you know, and everything, and that's how Fidel became famous in Cuba, you know, for standing up to Batista, and then as the revolution gained traction, and we had a show here about 6 months ago when we talked about the Cuban Revolution, and we talked about Jose Antonio Echevarria and Frank Pais, who were two of the main freedom fighters, okay, one in Havana, the other one in eastern Cuba, Oriente, but both of them were assassinated by Batista's soldiers, and the one who was left to continue the revolution was Fidel and Che Guevara, and their war was up in the mountains, but the main struggle, but I would say about 80 or 90% of the main struggle was in the valleys, you know, in the towns and not really the rural areas, you know, because the cities and the towns and pueblos and everything, that's where, you know, Batista's soldiers were mostly concentrated. But once Fidel came down from the mountains, and we have the phenomenon of most of Batista's soldiers sort of like quitting, you know, and putting down their arms, you know, and that's why, you know, this is such a phenomenon that so few individuals could create a revolution and take over a country the way that Fidel Castro and his people did.
Well, all right, let me butt in and ask you something then, because tell me if this is correct. I have the understanding that in the early years of the Cuban Revolution, that the U.S. supported Castro.
Absolutely. Up until the 11th hour, Ralph, you're absolutely right. You know, he was, in fact, many newsmen, you know, many reporters that came down to Cuba and spent time with him in the jungles, you know, and wrote all these wonderful articles, you know, that were sent back to the U.S. and described Castro as such a great freedom fighter and the one who was going to liberate Cuba and get rid of the dictatorship of the military dictatorship of Batista, Fulgencio Batista, who in his own right had been also from very, very humble beginnings. You know, Batista came from very extremely humble beginnings.
Right. Well, the way I came across it was in studying about Jack Ruby. I found out that throughout the 1950s, he was running. He was a gun runner for the CIA.
Yeah.
So in the early part of the 50s, he was running guns to Castro.
That's right.
And then later on, he was running guns to the anti-Castro.
Ralph, sit up. Don't lean forward like that. We can't see you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Absolutely. And it all has to do with the turnaround of Castro. Again, what I was just talking about, his upbringing. The way that must have left quite an impression on him. He was a bastard child. And he had a lot of bad feelings, towards his father, for being, the person that he was, and how he treated his employees. I mean, they were almost like slaves, and
So
that was never
reminded
recognized.
me of, Larry, that house there where you said that the workers had, very, impoverished quarters elsewhere.
Yes.
That basically is how the slave plantations were run.
Exactly.
All right. Well, we all know that he turned to the Soviet Union, but does anybody know what was the reason for him to turn against the United States who supported him?
Of course.
Well, I got a couple blurbs on that after Larry's done doing it.
No, go ahead, Don. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, okay. I just had a few paragraphs here that I had plucked out doing some research on Castro.
Yeah.
And okay. Now, and Larry had mentioned Castro's mother, Lena. Her name was Lena Ruz Gonzalez.
Yeah.
And she was a poor working class woman, and so there's not a lot of records of her family. Okay, there's not a paper trail, and apparently, what paper trail there was, Fidel had destroyed, way back when.
And Don, I'm sorry to interrupt. That's why these images, these photographs that I just presented are so rare, so important, because there are very few photographs of her.
So yeah, I was tooling around the internet, and sure enough, there is some speculation that Fidel was Jewish. So I went over to the Semitic Controversies blog at SemiticControversies.blogspot.com, and he had a blurb there. Apparently, Larry had mentioned that he went to that Jesuit school.
Yeah.
Well, apparently there, he mentioned that he was a Jew, and there was a blurb on the blog there that said, Castro was never an ideological fascist. Venice said, but he was definitely not an anti-Semite. Fidel had explained at the time that he could not be with the fascists because they were against the Jews, and he could not be against the Jews for the simple reason that he was one. He volunteered that he was descended through his grandmother from Jews. Although Fidel was Catholic, not Jewish, but that was, that was the school he went to. And Cuban, not European, but he told anyone who would listen that the Jews were his own people.
No, and Cuba did have a quite substantial Jewish population, Don.
Yeah, there was apparently back in when Fidel took over, there was about 15,000 of them.
Mm-hmm.
It was 15,000.
Which is a lot for a Caribbean island.
Yeah, a small island like that. Yeah.
I regard Fidel as a great nationalist, a great leader, wanted to benefit his people. I put him in the same category with Hugo Chavez, with Salvador Allende, and with Muammar Gaddafi. I admire Fidel. I think he was an excellent role model for other nations. But of course, American corporations were appalled by him. Anyone who cuts down on the profit margins of an American company is immediately labeled a communist. I don't think he was a communist. He simply believed that the government should benefit the people and that the resources of the country belong to the people. And call it whatever you want. I think that was admirable.
Well, Jim, he saw how United Fruit totally dominated the sugarcane industry. Having what they did was they turned the Cuban agricultural system into in Spanish it's monocultura. Okay.
Well, monopoly. It's going to be a monopoly.
Just of the concept of only planting and harvesting sugarcane and displacing the tobacco and the coffee crops, and that kind of thing, which was devastating because sugarcane is only a certain season, and after that, it's what they call dead time. okay? And that's what really brought about a lot of the poverty in not only Cuba, but Puerto Rico and the other Caribbean countries, because sugar was in such demand in those days. The only competition that they had was, for example, Russia, and their sugar was extracted from beets.
Now, is Ralph going to have enough time to savage Lifton and?
Yeah, we're done.
Okay, I just had a couple more blurbs to throw out.
Go.
Then we can turn it over to Ralph. Okay, so that brought me back to Final Judgment, and here's from the preface of Final Judgment. This is Michael Collins Piper quote. It was in 1989, while rereading A.J. Weberman and Michael Canfield's Coup d'etat in America, first published in 1975, that I first stumbled upon a strange reference that ultimately led to my research that is outlined here in the pages of Final Judgment. The reference, simple as it was, appearing on page 41, read as follows. After the assassination, an informer for the Secret Service and FBI who had infiltrated a Cuban exile group and was in the process of selling them machine guns reported that on November 21st, 1963, he was told, quote, "We now have plenty of money. Our new backers are the Jews.
Yeah.
As soon as they take care of JFK." And this man had furnished reliable information in the past.
That was Homer and Shiveria.
Yeah. So here's my thesis. All right. So Castro may well have been a Bolshevik Jew. And now we see the anti-Castro Cubans were run by Jews. And then I just got one paragraph here on the Bay of Pigs invasion itself. This is right out of Wikipedia. So the Bay of Pigs invasion was a failed military invasion of Cuba undertaken by CIA-sponsored paramilitary group Brigade 2506 on 17 April 1961. A counter-revolutionary military made up of Cuban exiles who traveled to the United States after Castro's takeover, trained and funded by the United States government's Central Intelligence Agency. Brigade 2506 fronted the armed wing of the Democratic Revolutionary Front, the DRF, and intended to overthrow the increasingly communist government of Fidel Castro. Launched from Guatemala and Nicaragua, the invading force was defeated within 3 days by the Cuban Revolutionary Armed Forces under the direct command of Prime Minister Fidel Castro. So that's the official party line of the Bay of Pigs invasion. Well, okay, let's just look at it. Okay, what was the net result of this Bay of Pigs? Okay, now there was all this wailing and gnashing of teeth about no air cover, but wasn't it? To me, it looked like it was designed from the start to quote to fail. Yeah, I think what the true goal of the Bay of Pigs invasion was to actually prop up Castro and his Bolshevik dictatorship down in Cuba. I don't think there was any intention of the power structure to actually overthrow Castro.
Well, what Talbot said in his book is that the purpose...
Sit up, Ralph, sit up.
The purpose of it was to force JFK to give him no choice but to send in the Air Force. They thought they were going to have that.
Well,
send in the Marines, Ralph. They knew the ragtag bag couldn't succeed. The invasion would be a failure. So either JFK had to send in the Marines to salvage the operation or take egg on his face. They were astounded when he took egg on his face.
Right.
Well, I don't think they ever really anticipated JFK going along with it, because he told them beforehand he was not going to supply wings or U.S. boots.
Yeah, no D-Dot. No
DDoS invasion. Yeah. Well, what was the net result of all this, though? So Castro was propped up in Cuba for over 50 years, and JFK made it another, 2.5.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they went straight to Vietnam. It seemed they were just obsessed with invading Cuba, but it all turned to Vietnam.
So I don't think Bay of Pigs was a failed military operation. I think
at that point it was the Middle East started happening. We had the USS Liberty, and then the march was on. So where we began the fight for Almighty Israel, it seems to me.
Moonrock Books. We're a group of scholars, experts, and authors feel the world really needs saving, and that resisting the American empire is the right thing to do. People are starved for truth. They are given lies. They subsist on lies, but it's not really living. People are not watching TV news. They're ceasing to read newspapers too, because they know by now they will not find it there. The biggest battle being fought anywhere is with information. If the people can receive the truth, they will do the right thing. We are publishing the truth about Sandy Hook, about the Boston bombing, about the moon landings, about the Holocaust, and much, much more. The truth. It falls upon us to fight the empire and save the world. Join us, Moonrock Books.
Coup d'etat in slow motion, connecting the dots between the assassinations of Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme, JFK, Robert Kennedy, and John Lennon. Now available on Amazon and lightonconspiracies.com. Coup d'etat in slow motion.